My name is Lisa. I'm 34, a CPA, a mother of two, and 6 weeks ago, my own father destroyed my reputation without saying a single accusation out loud. He didn't need to. It was Thanksgiving dinner, 14 family members around the table, turkey, cranberry sauce, the good china my mother only uses twice a year. My 8-year-old daughter Emma sitting 3 seats away, still wearing the little turkey pin she'd made at school, and my father stood up, tapped his glass with a silver knife, and said he had something weighing on his heart. "I've been hearing some troubling things," he said, "about Lisa's marriage, about choices she may have made." He paused, looked at my husband Paul with what I can only describe as rehearsed sympathy. "Paul, I want you to know, whatever happens, this family supports you. The children need stability." He never used the word. He didn't have to. Aunt Ruth gasped. My cousin Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. Uncle Harold shook his head slowly, the way people do at funerals. And my father just stood there, hands clasped in front of him, wearing the same expression he wore when he prayed for struggling souls at church. Concerned, grieved, innocent. "I'm not making accusations," he added, holding up his palms like a man being falsely blamed. "I'm just asking the family to pray for this situation and to give Paul and the children the support they're going to need." That was it. No evidence, no names, no details, just enough smoke to let everyone assume there was fire. By Friday, half of Ridgewood had heard about this situation with Lisa Stewart. By Sunday, Pastor David mentioned marriages under attack in our community during his sermon, and 3 women turned to look at me. By Wednesday, my daughter came home crying because a boy at school told her that her mommy did something bad, and that's why Grandpa doesn't love her anymore. She asked me what she did wrong. She thought it was her fault. The accusation was never spoken, but everyone heard it anyway. Here's what my father didn't know. While I was falling apart, while I was fielding whispers and watching old friends cross the street to avoid me, my husband Paul was sitting at our kitchen table every night after I went to bed, quietly pulling public records, and what he found about a charity, 3 dead companies, and $178,000 in missing scholarship money, well, it changed everything. What Paul did with that information at my father's own charity gala, even Dad never saw it coming. Before I go any further, if this story speaks to you, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what you hear, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'd love to know. Now, let me take you back 6 weeks to the Sunday afternoon when my mother asked me for a small favor. "You need to understand Ridgewood to understand my father. And you need to understand my father to understand why a man who never raised his voice could destroy his own daughter with a pause and a prayer request." Ridgewood, North Carolina is the kind of town where everyone knows your last name before they know your first, where who you sit with at church on Sunday says more about you than your tax return. And in Ridgewood, the Stewart name, my maiden name, was currency. My father, John Stewart, was senior vice president at First Community Bank. He was an elder at First Baptist Church, this beautiful old brick building with stained glass windows and a congregation of about 750 people. And for the past 12 years, he'd been the executive director of the Stewart Family Foundation, a 501c3 that gave scholarships to underprivileged teenagers. That last one was his crown jewel. Every year at the annual gala, he stood up in his Brooks Brothers suit, his Rolex catching the overhead light just so, and talked about legacy and giving back until people cried. Then they wrote checks. He drove a black Cadillac Escalade that he always parked in the first spot at the church lot, not because it was reserved, but because nobody would dream of taking it. People called him Mr. Stewart, even at the grocery store. He shook hands with both of his, the way politicians do, firm on the outside, deliberate underneath. And here's what you need to know about John Stewart as a father. He believed in hierarchy. Men lead, women support. Sons carry the name forward. Daughters were something he never quite figured out what to do with. Everyone in Ridgewood believed John Stewart was the finest man they knew, the most generous, the most principled. Everyone was wrong. I grew up in the shadow of a son my father always wished had come first. Stephen, my younger brother, is 29 now, 5 years behind me in age, a lifetime ahead of me in our father's estimation. When Stephen graduated high school, average grades, no honors, Dad paid his full tuition at state for a business degree. When I graduated 2 years before him, summa cum laude, full academic load, part-time job at a local tax office, Dad offered me a loan, not a gift, a loan, with interest, documented on paper. I paid off that student debt over 9 years, and I never once brought it up at family dinners, not once. Stephen got a job at First Community Bank right out of college, not because he earned it, because Dad made a call. He sat one cubicle away from Dad's corner office, and everyone on that floor knew exactly why he was there. Me? I passed the CPA exam on the first try. I got hired at Henderson and Shaw, a small accounting firm in town. When I told Dad over the phone, there was a pause. Then he said, "Accounting? That's just counting other people's money, sweetheart." When I married Paul, a civil engineer at Morrison Engineering, steady, smart, devoted, Dad pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner, his hand on my shoulder, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Well," he said, "at least you found someone willing." He said it like he was being generous, like I should be grateful. Paul heard it. He didn't say anything that night, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. I saw him twist his watch strap before bed, the way he does when he's holding something back. Still, I kept trying. I called Dad every Sunday, brought the kids to his house on holidays, helped set up chairs for church fundraisers. For 34 years, I tried to be the daughter he wanted. I didn't realize he never wanted a daughter at all. He wanted silence. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. It started with a phone call on a Sunday afternoon in early October. Mom called while I was folding laundry. Her voice was soft, the way it always got when Dad wasn't in the room. "Lisa, honey, the gala's coming up in a few weeks, and I need to pull together the financial reports for the board. Could you come by and help me sort through some of the foundation files? You're so much better at this than I am." I said yes without thinking. That was my pattern. Mom asks, I show up. I drove over to the house that afternoon while Dad was at the golf course with his usual foursome. The Escalade wasn't in the driveway, and I remember feeling a small, stupid relief at that. Mom led me into Dad's home office, the inner sanctum. Dark oak desk, leather chair, brass lamp, framed photos lining the shelves. One showed Dad shaking hands with the governor at some fundraiser. Another showed him receiving a Rotary Club award. The whole room smelt like furniture polish and self-importance. She handed me 2 file boxes and opened a laptop to an Excel file. "These are the past 2 years of foundation expenses," she said. "I just need everything organized so Mr. Keene and the board can review it before the gala." I sat down and started going through the entries: vendor payments, facility rentals, scholarship disbursements, printing costs, standard nonprofit stuff. Everything looked normal, clean, routine. And then my fingers stopped on the keyboard. There it was, one line among dozens. Meridian Consulting Group, $13,800. No contract reference, no project description, just consulting fee. I didn't know what it meant, not yet, but something about the way that number sat there, too round, too clean, tucked between legitimate expenses like a forged signature hidden in a stack of real ones, made the CPA in me go very quiet. I told myself it was probably nothing. Dad had run the foundation for 12 years. Consultants come and go. Maybe Meridian did strategic planning or donor outreach. When I married Paul, a civil engineer at Morrison Engineering, steady, smart, devoted, Dad pulled me aside at the rehearsal dinner. His hand on my shoulder, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Well," he said, "at least you found someone willing." He said it like he was being generous, like I should be grateful. Paul heard it. He didn't say anything that night, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. I saw him twist his watch strap before bed, the way he does when he's holding something back. Still, I kept trying. I called Dad every Sunday, brought the kids to his house on holidays, helped set up chairs for church fundraisers. For 34 years, I tried to be the daughter he wanted. I didn't realize he never wanted a daughter at all. He wanted silence. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. It started with a phone call on a Sunday afternoon in early October. Mom called while I was folding laundry. Her voice was soft, the way it always got when Dad wasn't in the room. "Lisa, honey, the gala's coming up in a few weeks and I need to pull together the financial reports for the board. Could you come by and help me sort through some of the foundation files? You're so much better at this than I am." I said yes without thinking. That was my pattern. Mom asks, I show up. I drove over to the house that afternoon when Dad was at the golf course with his usual foursome. The Escalade wasn't in the driveway, and I remember feeling a small, stupid relief at that. Mom led me into Dad's home office, the inner sanctum. Dark oak desk, leather chair, brass lamp, framed photos lining the shelves. One showed Dad shaking hands with the governor at some fundraiser. Another showed him receiving a Rotary Club award. The whole room smelled like furniture polish and self-importance. She handed me 2 file boxes and opened a laptop to an Excel file. "These are the past 2 years of foundation expenses," she said. "I just need everything organized so Mr. Keene and the board can review it before the gala." I sat down and started going through the entries. Vendor payments, facility rentals, scholarship disbursements, printing costs, standard nonprofit stuff. Everything looked normal, clean, routine. And then my fingers stopped on the keyboard. There it was, one line among dozens. Meridian Consulting Group, $13,800. No contract reference, no project description, just consulting fee. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but something about the way that number sat there, too round, too clean, tucked between legitimate expenses like a forged signature hidden in a stack of real ones, made the CPA in me go very quiet. I told myself it was probably nothing. Dad had run the foundation for 12 years. Consultants come and go. Maybe Meridian did strategic planning or donor outreach. "Yes, Dad." I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, phone still warm in my hand. Paul was brushing his teeth in the bathroom. He came out, looked at my face, and said nothing, just sat down next to me. And then, faintly, just before I'd hung up, I'd heard Dad's voice shifting, not talking to me anymore, talking to someone else in the room. 3 words, clipped, urgent. "We have a problem." What happened next still gives me chills. Over the next 2 weeks, the temperature around me dropped, slowly at first, then all at once. Stephen called first. His voice was different, not the careless little brother tone I was used to, something harder, borrowed. "Dad told me you've been snooping through foundation records. What exactly are you trying to do, Lisa? Destroy this family?" I told him I wasn't snooping. I was doing what Mom asked. He cut me off. "Just stay out of it. Seriously, you don't understand how things work." Then Aunt Ruth, Dad's younger sister, canceled our Saturday lunch. She texted a single line. Something came up, rain check. She never rescheduled. Mom was the one who scared me most. She stopped answering my calls. My texts went from warm to brief to nothing. Busy today, talk later. Then just silence. I could see the read receipts. She was opening every message. She just wasn't replying. It took me a few days to understand what was happening. Dad was telling people his version first. I pieced it together from fragments. A cousin's awkward pause on the phone. A church friend who suddenly couldn't meet for coffee. John Stewart was walking through his circle with a careful, wounded expression, telling anyone who'd listen that his eldest daughter was going through something, that she was paranoid, that he was worried about her. He wasn't angry, he was performing grief, and it was working. One night, after the kids were asleep, I told Paul what I'd been noticing. The pulled back invitations, the changed tones, the silence from my own mother. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something I didn't fully appreciate at the time. "Your dad's not upset, Lisa. He's strategic. There's a difference." He was right, but neither of us knew the strategy was only halfway done. 2 days later, Dad invited me to the house. "Come by after work. We should talk." I went alone. Paul offered to come, but something told me this was the kind of conversation Dad would only have without witnesses. The living room was staged like a courtroom. Dad sat in his armchair, leather, high-backed, positioned under the brass reading lamp like a throne. Stephen was on the sofa across from him, legs crossed, arms folded. The Tiffany lamp on the side table cast warm light across them both, golden, important looking. Mom was nowhere in sight. I heard faint sounds from the kitchen, a cabinet closing, water running, but she didn't come out. On the mantel, the family portrait caught my eye, the one taken 3 Christmases ago. I noticed with a cold little jolt that it had been shifted, pushed to the far corner, half behind a candlestick. Dad didn't stand, he just looked at me. "This is my family," he said. "That foundation is my legacy. You will not say a single word about what you think you saw, to anyone, ever." He paused. "Do you understand?" "Dad, if there's nothing wrong, then why?" "Because I said so." He leaned forward. "I'm giving you an opportunity, Lisa, a last one." Stephen uncrossed his arms just long enough to add, "Just drop it, Lisa, you're embarrassing yourself." I stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then I said something I hadn't planned. "I didn't say I was going to tell anyone, Dad. I asked you a question. The fact that you can't answer it tells me everything." Nobody spoke. I turned around and walked out the front door. My hands shook the entire drive home. I gripped the steering wheel of my old Honda Accord so hard my knuckles went white. And I didn't know, I truly didn't know, that in 5 days my father would go nuclear. That's when everything changed. It was Thanksgiving. The dining room was set for 14. Turkey in the center of the table, steam rising from the carved breast, cranberry sauce in the crystal dish my grandmother had left to my mother, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, sweet potato pie waiting on the sideboard. I hadn't wanted to come. Paul and I had talked about it the night before, lying in bed in the dark, voices low so the kids wouldn't hear. "You don't owe them this," he said. "After the way your father spoke to you?" "I know, but Mom asked, and Emma's been talking about seeing her cousins for weeks. So we went, for the children. Isn't that always the reason?" The first hour was almost normal, stilted but civil. Dad avoided me, I avoided him. Stephen made small talk about football. The kids ran around with their cousins. Mom kept refilling water glasses with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dessert was being served when Dad tapped his knife against his crystal glass. 3 soft clinks. The table went quiet. "He had something weighing on his heart," he said. His voice had that slight tremble, the one I'd heard him use when he talked about wayward youth at foundation galas. "And I think as a family we need to address it together." I felt Paul's hand find mine under the table. My father looked around the room, making eye contact with each person except me. When he spoke again, his words were careful, measured, devastating. "I've been hearing some troubling things about Lisa's marriage, about choices that may have been made." He paused, looked at Paul with practiced sympathy. "Paul, I want you to know that whatever happens, this family supports you. You're a good man, a good father, and those children," his voice caught, "those children are going to need stability." Emma was watching. She was 8 years old. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. She understood that Grandpa was saying something very bad about Mommy. "I'm not making accusations," my father said, holding up his hands like a man being falsely blamed. "I would never do that to my own daughter. I'm simply asking this family to pray for this marriage, to pray for wisdom, and to be there for Paul and the children in the difficult days ahead." He sat down, reached for his wine glass, took a sip, and said nothing else. That was the genius of it. He never used the word affair. He never said adultery. He never accused me of anything specific. He just painted a picture with shadows and let everyone fill in the details themselves. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then Aunt Ruth started crying softly into her napkin. My cousin Jennifer's husband actually moved his chair away from me. I heard the legs scrape against the hardwood. Uncle Harold shook his head slowly, like he was watching a casket being lowered. And my mother. My mother sat at the other end of that 12-foot table, hands folded in her lap, staring at her untouched pumpkin pie, and said absolutely nothing. Paul stood up. His voice was steady, but I could feel his pulse racing where our hands were still clasped. "We're leaving. Emma, Noah, get your coats." My father didn't argue. He just nodded sadly, like a man who had tried his best and been rejected. "We'll be praying for you, Lisa," he said as I walked past him. "I hope you find your way back to the truth." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because what do you say to a man who just burned down your life without ever striking a match? In Ridgewood, you don't need social media. You just need one dinner, one implication, and 48 hours. By Friday, Aunt Ruth had called her friend from the church choir. I can't say what exactly, but pray for Lisa's marriage. By Saturday, that friend had told 3 women in her prayer group, John Stewart is devastated. Something about Lisa and another man.
By Sunday morning, Pastor David stood at the pulpit and spoke about marriages under attack in our community, and I watched 3 heads turn in my direction. By Monday, 2 of my clients at Henderson and Shaw requested a different accountant. My boss called me into his office and closed the door. I'm not saying I believe anything, Lisa, but people are talking. Maybe take a few days off, just until things settle. By Wednesday, Emma came home from school with red eyes and wouldn't look at me. "Mommy," she finally said, sitting on her bed still wearing her backpack. "Jake said I'm the girl whose mommy did a bad thing. He said that's why Grandpa doesn't love you anymore." She looked up at me with those 8-year-old eyes. "Did I do something bad too? Is that why Grandpa didn't hug me goodbye?" I held her for a long time. I couldn't speak. My father had never accused me of anything, not technically, not in words that could be quoted back to him. If I confronted him, he'd say, "I never said that. I simply asked people to pray. You're being dramatic, Lisa. This is why people worry about you." That's the thing about insinuation. You can't fight smoke. He didn't need to lie about me. He just needed to let other people do it for him. 10 days after Thanksgiving, I was a shell of myself. I'd lost 7 pounds. My sleep came in 90-minute fragments, broken by the phantom buzz of a phone that had mostly stopped ringing. At work, I moved through spreadsheets on autopilot. My fingers knew the formulas even when my brain was somewhere else entirely. One evening, I sat at our kitchen table, that IKEA table Paul and I had assembled the week we moved in, the one with the wobbly leg we kept meaning to fix, and I held a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Through the back window, I could see Emma and Noah chasing each other around the swing set, laughing, oblivious. Thank God for that. And I thought, maybe I should just let it go. Maybe I should call Dad and apologize. Tell him I overstepped. Promise to never mention Meridian or the foundation again. Get my family back. Get my name back. Let my children have a grandfather who actually shows up to their school plays. Was being right really worth all of this? When Paul came home, I told him, maybe I should just apologize, get things back to normal. He set his hard hat on the counter and looked at me for a long time. No frustration, no judgment, just that steady, quiet gaze that made me fall in love with him 10 years ago.
"Lisa," he said, "let me ask you something. If your dad had nothing to hide, why did he burn down your reputation in front of 14 people instead of just having a conversation?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Peace built on a lie isn't peace, it's a cage. That night, after I went to bed, Paul stayed up. I heard the faint click of his laptop opening in the living room. He typed one word into the search bar: Meridian. Paul didn't rush. That's not who he is. He's the kind of man who measures twice, cuts once, and then measures again just to be sure. So he started with the basics. Here's something most people don't know. If you run a 501c3 nonprofit in the United States, your IRS Form 990 is a public document. Anyone can look it up. It's available on sites like ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer. Free, searchable, completely legal. Paul found the Stewart Family Foundation's filings in about 4 minutes. He pulled the last 5 years of 990s and started reading. Not the way a casual person would, skimming the mission statement and the big numbers. He read the way I would have, line by line, vendor by vendor. He cross-referenced every payee against the North Carolina State of Secretary of Business Entity database, also public, also free. Meridian Consulting Group, dissolved in 2022, last active filing 3 years ago, no registered agent, no office address on record. Yet the foundation had paid them $52,000 over 2 years, including 2 payments after the company ceased to exist. But Meridian wasn't alone. Paul found 2 more vendors with the same fingerprint: Summit Advisory LLC, $54,000 across 3 years, dissolved 18 months ago. Pinnacle Services Group, $72,000 over 4 years, registered to a P.O. box that appeared on no other business filing in the state. 3 shell vendors, $178,000 total, all with the same generic consulting fee description. All signed off by a single person. Every check, every single one, carried only one signature: John W. Stewart. The foundation's bylaws, available in the 990 attachments, required 2 signatures for any disbursement over $5,000. Dad had been signing a loan for 5 years, and either nobody on the board noticed or nobody dared ask. Paul sat back in his chair at midnight, his watch glinting under the kitchen light, and said to no one in particular, "Your dad's been paying dead companies for 2 years. That's not an oversight. That's a pattern." The next piece came from a name buried in an old 990.
Paul was scrolling through the foundation's board listings year by year when he noticed something. A woman named Katie Williams had served on the board for 6 years, then vanished from the roster 2 years ago. No explanation, no farewell note. She was there in one filing, gone in the next. He found her on LinkedIn, property manager in a town 30 minutes south of Ridgewood. He sent a message that was pure Paul, polite, direct, devastatingly honest. "Ms. Williams, my name is Paul Stanfield. I'm married to Lisa Stewart. Her father recently destroyed her reputation publicly. I believe it may be connected to the foundation's finances. Would you be willing to speak with me?" She replied within the hour. They met at a diner off the interstate, far enough from Ridgewood that no one would see. Katie was in her early 50s, composed, careful with her words. She ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. "I started asking questions 2 years ago," she said, "about vendor payments that didn't make sense. I brought it up at a board meeting and John looked at me like I'd set fire to the church." She paused, stared at the coffee she wasn't drinking. "After that, he started calling the other board members individually. Within a month, I got a phone call, John himself, telling me it would be best for everyone if I stepped down." She had the email he'd sent her. She'd kept it for 2 years. Paul asked her why she hadn't reported it. She looked down at her untouched cup. "Because John Stewart runs this town, and I have a business here. He erased me from that board like I never existed." Then she looked up. "But when I heard what happened at Thanksgiving, what he said about Lisa, I knew he was doing it again, erasing someone who got too close." She paused. "There's one more person who knows, but I don't know if she'd ever speak up." Paul already knew who she meant. 3 days later, Paul walked out to our mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon and found a manila envelope with no return address. Inside, a USB flash drive and a single handwritten note on plain white paper. In handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. The same loops, the same careful slant, the same hand that had written my name on every birthday card for 34 years. "He keeps this in the locked drawer. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. M." Paul plugged the USB into his laptop. It contained one file, an Excel spreadsheet, Dad's personal financial tracking, the one he kept separate from the foundation's official books, and it laid everything bare. Every withdrawal from the foundation account, every transfer to his personal checking, through the shell vendors, dates, amounts, routing numbers, 5 years of clean, meticulous theft. The total, $178,000. And in the margin notes, the kind of annotation someone makes when they think no one will ever see, one entry read, "Stephen APT, $2,200 a month." My father had been paying my brother's rent with scholarship money meant for underprivileged teenagers. Paul called me into the kitchen. I looked at the screen, then at the note, then at the handwriting, and I cried. Not because of the numbers, because of my mother. Mary Stewart, who had spent 36 years deferring to her husband, who had stopped answering my calls, who had sat in silence while my father destroyed me at Thanksgiving dinner. She had waited until the house was empty, opened the locked drawer with a key she wasn't supposed to have, copied the file, and mailed it to us, without a word, without a phone call, just a USB drive and 7 words of apology. 36 years of silence. And she chose me. "We have everything now," Paul said quietly. I wiped my eyes. "So what do we do with it?" For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to have someone fight for me. Not because they had to, because they chose to. We sat at the kitchen table that night, the same table where I'd almost given up, where Paul had searched for Meridian, where the printouts had piled up stack by stack, and we made a plan. The Stewart Family Foundation's annual gala was 2 weeks away. 280 guests, donors, bankers, church leaders, local business owners, a city councilwoman. My father would be there in his Brooks Brothers suits, accepting the Founders Award he'd created for himself, shaking hands with the same people whose money he'd been siphoning for half a decade. More importantly, 3 specific people would be in that room. Robert Keene, the board chairman, a practicing attorney, Pastor David Morrison, and Helen Porter, the compliance officer at First Community Bank, which was the foundation's largest institutional donor, Paul's plan was simple, elegant even. We would not make a scene, we would not give a speech, we would not confront my father publicly. We would walk into that gala, hand each of those 3 people a folder, and leave. 3 folders, same contents, printed 990 filings, Secretary of State dissolution records, the screenshots I'd taken, Katie Williams' signed statement with the email my father had sent pressuring her resignation, and a cover letter requesting an independent review of the foundation's finances. Let them decide. Let the evidence do the talking. I agreed, but I drew a line. I'm not turning this into a revenge show, Paul. I don't want to humiliate my father in front of 280 people. I just want the truth to have an address. Paul put his hand over mine. We're not going to humiliate him, Lisa. We're going to give the people who trust him the information they deserve. What happens after that? That's on him. I looked at the stacks of paper. Let the documents do the talking. The documents, Paul said, don't know how to lie. But first, I had to disappear. I stopped calling Mom, stopped texting, stopped trying to explain myself or defend my marriage. When Aunt Ruth finally reached out with a tentative, "Are you okay?" I replied with a single word, "Fine." I didn't show up at church, didn't appear at the grocery store at times when I might run into anyone from the family. I became a ghost, and I watched them fill in the silence with their own assumptions. Stephen posted a photo on Instagram, Sunday brunch at the country club. Him, Dad, Mom, his girlfriend of the month. White tablecloths, mimosas. Sunlight streaming through tall windows. Caption, "Family is everything. Hold your loved ones close." I wasn't in the photo. I hadn't been invited. 156 likes, hearts from people I'd known my whole life. At church, Dad was playing the wounded patriarch perfectly. Paul went one Sunday without telling me, sat in the back pew near the exit, watched everything. He told me later that Dad had stood up during the prayer request portion and asked for continued prayers for his family during this difficult season. 400 people comforting the man who had publicly destroyed his own daughter. Paul sat very still through all of it. He didn't react, didn't confront anyone, just watched and thought. And what he thought was this. A man who is telling the truth doesn't need to perform grief in front of 400 people. A man who is telling the truth doesn't insinuate horrible things about his daughter at Thanksgiving dinner. A man who is telling the truth doesn't pay dead companies $178,000. Something was built on bad ground here, and Paul, a man who'd spent 15 years pouring concrete foundations, knew exactly what that looked like. They thought my silence meant I'd given up. They had no idea it meant I was ready. Paul printed 3 identical dossiers at the FedEx office in the next town over. He used their self-service printers, paid cash, didn't make small talk. Each folder contained 5 years of IRS Form 990 filings, with the Shell vendor payments highlighted, North Carolina Secretary of State dissolution records for Meridian Consulting Group, Summit Advisory LLC, and Pinnacle Services Group. My original screenshots from the foundation's internal books, Katie Williams' signed written statement along with the email from my father pressuring her resignation, a copy of Dad's personal spreadsheet from the USB, and a 1-page cover letter addressed to whom it may concern, requesting an independent financial review. The cover letter was Paul's work. No accusations, no adjectives, just facts and a request. 287 words of the most devastating politeness I'd ever read. I went through every page myself, twice, checked the math, confirmed the dates, cross-referenced the entity numbers. The CPA in me wanted it bulletproof, and it was. The night before the gala, Paul set the 3 manila envelopes on the kitchen table, side by side, neat, labeled, board chair, pastor, compliance. I stood in the doorway and looked at them. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," I said. I didn't sleep that night, not from fear, from something I hadn't felt in 6 weeks, something unfamiliar and electric, something I finally recognized around 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my father's permission to exist. The Stewart Family Foundation annual gala was held at the Ridgewood Country Club, a white columned building overlooking the 7th fairway with floor-to-ceiling windows and a chandelier in the foyer that probably cost more than my car. 280 guests, women in cocktail dresses and statement jewelry, men in dark suits holding whiskey neat, a string quartet playing Vivaldi near the bar, tables draped in white linen topped with arrangements of white peonies and flickering tea lights, A banner hung across the main wall in navy and gold. 12 years of changing young lives, the Stewart Family Foundation. At the center of it all was my father. Navy suit, crisp white shirt, Rolex catching the chandelier light with every handshake. He moved through the crowd like he owned the room, because in a very real sense, he did. Every donor there had written a check to his foundation. Every church member there had prayed for him on Sunday service. John Stewart, in this room at this moment, was untouchable. Stephen stood beside him in a charcoal suit, playing the dutiful son, smiling, nodding, refilling Dad's sparkling water. Mom was at the VIP table in a black dress, hands folded in her lap, face carefully neutral. Pastor David Morrison was there, seated at the head table. Helen Porter from First Community's compliance department was there too. The bank was the gala's biggest sponsor. Robert Keene, the board chairman, a silver-haired attorney with gold-rimmed glasses, was nursing a bourbon near the podium. Paul and I arrived at 7:45. We didn't have tickets. Paul parked the truck at the far end of the lot, away from the Escalades and the BMWs. He wore a clean white button-down and pressed chinos. I wore a simple navy dress, not designer, not meant to impress, just meant to say, I belong here. Paul carried a leather bag with 3 manila envelopes inside. We walked through the front doors and nobody stopped us. In a room full of people who'd heard my father's Thanksgiving speech, nobody recognized the disgraced daughter. Or maybe they just didn't expect her to show up. The MC, a local radio personality with a booming voice and a tuxedo, stepped up to the podium at 8:15. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce a man who has dedicated his life to the young people of this community. The crowd clapped. Dad rose from his seat, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the podium the way he walked everywhere, like the room had been built around him. He gripped the edges of the lectern, swept his gaze across 280 faces, and began. He thanked the donors, he thanked the board, he told a story about a girl named Keisha who'd received the foundation's first scholarship 12 years ago and was now a registered nurse at Duke. His voice caught when he said her name, just a little, just enough. The crowd leaned in. Our family has given everything to this mission, he said, and recently, as some of you know, we faced personal challenges that I won't pretend haven't been painful. A pause, a breath. The Rolex glinted. But the work continues, because legacy is not about what happens to you, it's about what you build that outlasts any one person. 280 people stood and applauded. Stephen was on his feet first, clapping with his hands above his shoulders. The MC presented my father with a Founder's Award, a crystal trophy, heavy and gleaming, etched with his name. He held it up. The chandelier caught it and threw light across the room like a halo. I was standing at the back, near the hallway that led to the restrooms and the service entrance. Paul was beside me. I could feel his heartbeat through his sleeve where our arms touched. I watched my mother at the VIP table. She was clapping, but her hands, I could see them even from 40 feet away. Her hands were shaking. That was the moment John Stewart stood tallest, crystal in his hand, 280 people on their feet, the golden pinnacle of a lifetime spent building an image. It was also the last. Paul waited for the applause to die and the cocktail hour to begin. He didn't hurry. He never hurries. As the crowd broke into clusters and the bartender started pouring, Paul walks across the room with the leather bag at his side. He didn't weave or dodge. He walked in a straight line, the way he walks a job site, deliberate, unhurried, absolutely certain of where he's going. His first stop was Robert Keene. The board chairman was standing near the podium, bourbon in hand, talking to a woman in pearls. Paul waited for a natural pause, then extended his hand. Mr. Keene, my name is Paul Stanfield. I apologize for the interruption, and I'll only take 2 minutes of your time. This envelope contains information about the financial management of the Stewart Family Foundation. I'm not asking you to believe anything tonight. I'm asking you to read the documents. Keene took the envelope. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on it. Next, Pastor David Morrison, seated at the head table, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. Paul leaned down and spoke quietly. Pastor, forgive me for not making an appointment, but I believe you'll want to see this before the evening ends. It concerns the foundation and the trust this congregation has placed in it. Pastor David accepted the envelope with both hands, the way he accepted offering plates on Sundays. Finally, Helen Porter, standing near the bar in a tailored gray suit. Paul approached her with a third envelope and said, Miss Porter, what's inside here relates to a senior officer at your bank. I believe your compliance team will consider it relevant. Helen looked at the envelope, then at Paul. She didn't take a sip of her wine. She took the folder. 3 envelopes, 90 seconds. No raised voice, no accusations, no scene. From across the room, I saw my father notice. His head turned. He saw Paul talking to Helen Porter, then looked at Keene, who was already opening his envelope, then at Pastor David, who was reading the cover letter with his glasses pulled low. My father set down his crystal trophy and started walking, but it was already done. He intercepted Paul near the dessert table where the catering staff was arranging petit fours on a silver tray. He grabbed Paul's arm, not hard enough to make a scene, but hard enough that Paul felt it. His smile was still on, but his eyes had gone flat. The Rolex flashed as he leaned in. "What do you think you're doing here?" he hissed. "This is a private event." Paul didn't pull away. "It's a charity gala, Mr. Stewart, open to the community. I thought the people in this room might want to know where their donations went." My father's jaw tightened. "You are a civil engineer, a manual laborer. My daughter made the mistake of marrying beneath her, and now you, $178,000, Mr. Stewart." Paul's voice was level, almost gentle. "Meridian Consulting Group was dissolved 2 years ago. The foundation kept paying them. Summit Advisory, same thing. Pinnacle Services, same. All the checks signed by you alone, in violation of the foundation's own dual signature requirement." For the first time in my life, I watched my father have nothing to say. His mouth opened, closed. The color drained from his face in stages, starting at his forehead. "That's a lie. My daughter fed you paranoid." "The IRS Form 990 is a public record, sir. I didn't need anyone to feed me anything." Robert Keene appeared at my father's elbow. He wasn't smiling. "John, I think we should step into the back room, now." Dad tried. "Robert, this is a family misunderstanding. My daughter has been—" "The documents suggest otherwise." Keene's voice was quiet and final. "Helen Porter is already on the phone with your bank's general counsel." Nearby, Stephen had gone pale. I could see him from where I stood, motionless, a champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips. He knew. If they pulled the thread on that spreadsheet, they'd find the line that read Stephen Apt, $2,200 a month. And there would be no explaining that away. The back room was a private dining space off the main hall. Burgundy carpet, mahogany table, a painting of some fox hunt on the wall. The kind of room where country club members settle estate disputes over sherry. That night it was where John Stewart's world collapsed. The dominoes didn't fall all at once. They fell in sequence, each one heavier than the last. That night at the gala, Keene announced to the board members present that my father was immediately suspended as executive director. The foundation's bank accounts were frozen pending an independent audit. The Crystal Founders Award sat uncollected on the podium table for the rest of the evening. Within 48 hours, Helen Porter had filed a formal report with First Community's general counsel. A senior VP running an embezzlement scheme through a charity he directed, while employed at the bank that was the charity's biggest donor, represented a compliance liability the bank could not absorb. My father was placed on administrative leave, then terminated. 28 years at First Community, gone in a single HR meeting. 1 week later, Pastor David convened an emergency session of the elder board at First Baptist. The vote was 6-1 to remove my father from his position as church elder. The single abstention came from his golf partner, who didn't vote against him, but couldn't bring himself to vote for him either. The North Carolina Attorney General's office received the dossier via certified mail. Paul sent it the morning after the gala. Within 3 weeks, the AG's Public Integrity Unit opened a formal investigation into the Stewart Family Foundation. Stephen was quietly flagged by First Community's internal review when auditors traced the apartment payments. He was reassigned to a back office role and placed on a performance improvement plan, the corporate equivalent of being put in a corner. I didn't take anything from my father. The documents did. I just made sure they found the right hands. 10 days after the gala, my phone rang. The caller ID said Dad. I almost didn't answer. Paul was in the kitchen with the kids. He looked at me, I looked at the screen. Then I picked up. "Are you satisfied now?" His voice was different, thinner, like someone had let the air out of it. "You've destroyed everything I built. Everything." "You destroyed it, Dad. I just asked a question." "You were always the difficult one, Lisa. Always pushing, always needing to prove you were smarter than everyone else. If you just kept your mouth shut." "If I'd kept my mouth shut, you'd still be stealing scholarship money from teenagers." Silence. A long one. "I sacrificed everything for this family," he said, and I could hear him reaching for the old script, the patriarch, the provider, the man who carried the weight. But the words sounded hollow now,
like lines from a play he'd been performing so long he forgot it wasn't real. No, Dad, you sacrificed everything for yourself. The family was just the stage. More silence. I'm not going to call again, I said. And I meant it. Not from hatred. I was surprised to find I didn't hate him. From something quieter than that. I can't keep loving someone who treats my silence as the price of belonging. He started to say something, maybe an argument, maybe an apology, though I doubt it, but I'd already taken the phone away from my ear. I hung up, and I didn't cry. For the first time in 34 years after a conversation with my father, I did not cry. I set the phone down on the counter, walked to the kitchen, sat between my children, and helped Noah color a picture of a dinosaur. The dinosaur was purple, Noah insisted. I thought that was exactly right. The apologies came in slowly, like people wading back into water they'd left too quickly. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who'd avoided me at the grocery store, showed up at my door on a Saturday morning with a loaf of banana bread and red-rimmed eyes. "Lisa, I am so sorry. I should have asked you what happened before I believed him. I was a coward, and you deserved better." I thanked her. I meant it. I also didn't pretend it was nothing, because it wasn't. My boss called me into his office. Office, same closed door. But this time he said, "I owe you an apology, and the partners have been talking. We'd like to promote you to senior accountant. You've earned it several times over." Pastor David sent a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, on church stationery. "I failed you, Lisa. I stood in that pulpit and prayed for the wrong person. I cannot undo that. But I can tell you that the foundation is being restructured under a new board, and I would be honored if you would consider joining it." Emma came home from school one afternoon with a grin so wide it split her face. "Mommy, Jake Fid's sorry. He said his mom told you're actually really brave and he should never have said those things. He wants to come to my birthday party." I knelt down and hugged her so tight she giggled and said, "Mom, you're squishing me." And then there was Mom. She called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was fragile, but clear. Clearer than I'd heard it in months. "I'm sorry, Lisa. I should have been stronger. A long time ago." "Mom, you were strong. That USB drive? After 36 years of silence, you chose to act. That was the bravest thing anyone in this family has ever done." She cried. I cried. It was the good kind. 2 months later, Ridgewood looked different, or maybe I just saw it differently. My father sold the Escalade. I heard it through the grapevine. He needed cash for legal fees. His attorney was managing communications with the AG's office, where the investigation was still active. The Rolex disappeared from his wrist. I don't know if he sold it or just couldn't stand to wear it anymore. Stephen left town, moved to Charlotte, didn't tell anyone. His social media went dark. No more golf course photos, no more best mentor captions. Last I heard, he was working at a regional insurance company and not speaking to Dad. Mom filed for legal separation in January. She moved in with her sister, Aunt Helen, in a little ranch house with a garden out back. For the first time in her adult life, she opened a bank account in her own name. She calls me every few days now. Real calls, long ones, about nothing in particular, about everything. The Stewart Family Foundation was placed under new leadership, a 5-person board, no stewards on it. The misappropriated funds were being pursued through legal channels. It would take time, but the scholarships would continue. The kids who needed them would still get them. Pastor David asked me to join the new board. I declined, gently. "I think the foundation needs faces that don't carry the Stewart name," I told him, "but thank you, truly." Life isn't perfect. It never is after something breaks this badly. Some relationships didn't survive. Some trust couldn't be rebuilt. But Paul still gets up at 5:30, puts on his hard hat, and goes to work. He still wears that watch. Emma still does cartwheels in the backyard. Noah still insists every dinosaur be purple. And our kitchen table, the IKEA one with the wobbly leg, it's clean now. No folders, no printouts, no envelopes. Just 2 coffee mugs and a crayon drawing of a brontosaurus. It's not mahogany. It doesn't have a locked drawer, but it held the truth when it mattered. And that's enough. Before I let you go, here are 3 things this story taught me, not as advice, just as things I wish someone had told me 6 weeks earlier. First, silence isn't loyalty. I spent 34 years keeping quiet because I thought that's what good daughters did. It wasn't. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is refuse to protect their lies. Second, if someone destroys your reputation with insinuation instead of having a conversation in private, ask yourself what they're protecting. My father didn't stand up at Thanksgiving because I'd done something wrong. He stood up because I'd seen a spreadsheet. Third, you don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to scream or curse or make a scene. You just need the right documents, the right moment, and a husband who knows how to read a 990 form. People started calling me brave, but I wasn't brave. I was cornered. Bravery was my mother slipping that USB into an envelope after 36 years of keeping the peace. Thank you for listening to the end. Seriously, thank you. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been silenced by someone who was supposed to protect you, or if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, I want you to know you're not alone, and the cost of staying silent is always higher in the end. Hit like if this resonated, subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and drop a comment. I'd love to know, have you ever had to set a boundary with someone in your family? What happened? Your stories matter. I read everyone. And if you're looking for more, check the description below. There are other stories waiting for you. Take care of yourselves. I mean that.